And over the course of the first 5 years of my career, I was living and working in rural Africa and saw that people were spending more money on kerosene and diesel than they would on modern energy solutions like solar.
They said Africa would always stay in the dark, powerless, dependent, begging for scraps of energy. Mozambique just answered with a $6 billion thunderclap on the Zambezi. The Mfanda Dam isn't just about electricity, it's Africa raising its fist, saying, "We light our own future now." But how was it made possible? Let's find out. Some announcements pass through the news cycle unnoticed, and then there are announcements that tear through the continent like thunder rolling across the Zambezi. On September 8, 2025, Mozambique declared to the world that it had secured World Bank backing for a $6 billion hydroelectric plant, the Mfanda project, the largest dam scheme Southern Africa has seen in half a century. In a region often written off by analysts as fragile, cash-strapped, and politically unstable, Mozambique stepped forward with a headline that was impossible to ignore. "We are building power on our own river, on our own terms." The numbers alone are seismic. 1,500 megawatts of generation capacity locked into place for 2031. A $6 billion price tag that positions the project not as a side initiative, but as a continental pivot point. A site located 60 kilometers downstream from Cahora Bassa, itself a dam that has defined Mozambique's energy identity since the 1970s, ensuring that the Zambezi River, long a symbol of untapped potential, will again shape the country's future. These are not vague promises. These are concrete, measurable steps that force both regional neighbors and global players to recalculate their energy maps. The drama of the announcement was deliberate. President Daniel Chapo, still shadowed by the disputes of his 2024 election victory, raised his fist before jubilant crowds as if to say, "This is our proof of legitimacy." For Chapo, Mfanda was more than infrastructure. It was an assertion of political strength, a way of anchoring himself not in campaign slogans, but in a physical project too big to dismiss. The symbolism was heavy. The World Bank's Ajay Banga, fresh from touring rural electrification projects, stood alongside him, a signal to both Mozambicans and the outside world that this was not just an African dream, but a global acknowledgement that Mozambique is a serious energy player. And yet, beneath the ceremony, the project's meaning stretched wider. Southern Africa is facing an energy deficit of nearly 10,000 megawatts, an absence that cripples industries, fuels blackouts, and stunts growth. By choosing to build Mfanda Mozambique positioned itself not only as a national winner, but as a regional anchor. South Africa, racked by years of rolling blackouts, and Zimbabwe, struggling to stabilize its grid, suddenly have to look north to Maputo for a share of their survival. What was once a peripheral state on the edge of regional politics now stands in the center, holding the keys to future stability. It is this sudden shift, from overlooked to indispensable, that gives the announcement its bite. Analysts in Europe and Washington are forced to swallow the fact that Mozambique, a country often described by its poverty statistics, has just pulled off a project that could reset power dynamics in southern Africa. The irony is sharp. While the West diverts development budgets to defense and inward crises, Mozambique channels global capital into a project that promises not handouts, but long-term leverage. This is the difference between aid and ambition, between dependency and design. What makes the moment historic is not only the project's size, but its timing. Mozambique emerges from years of internal turmoil, civil war scars, insurgency in the north, and economic stagnation. Yet here it is, announcing the biggest infrastructure venture in a generation. It is almost as if the country is declaring, yes, we have been broken before, but today we build something that cannot be ignored. And that's the point. The breaking news is not only about turbines, megawatts, or contracts. It is about identity. Mozambique is saying to its own citizens, to its neighbors, and to the world, we are not defined by instability. We are defined by construction. The Mfanda Dam is as much a statement as it is a structure. But here lies the next question, the one that can't be ignored. If the project itself is monumental, what does it actually mean for the people on the ground who have lived in darkness for decades? The truth is, in a country where entire districts go to bed by candlelight, the arrival of electricity doesn't just brighten homes, it reorders society. A single bulb in a classroom means lessons can stretch past sunset. A powered well pump means women no longer walk miles to fetch water. A refrigerator in a local shop changes what can be sold, stored, and saved. This is not an abstract development language. It is the daily texture of survival in Mozambique. Take the example of small entrepreneurs. In neighborhoods just outside Maputo, stalls that once shut down at dusk now buzz late into the evening. Vendors of fish, fruit, and bread can keep their stock fresh, extending both shelf life and income. It is here in these overlooked corners that electricity quietly multiplies wealth, not in millions of dollars but in thousands of meticais that feed families, pay school fees, and keep hope alive. When the national conversation is about billions, these are the microeconomies that prove the investment is more than a line in a government ledger. Electricity also changes culture. For generations, rural families gathered around fires not only for light but for security, a way of holding the night at bay. With power poles rising across villages, the night itself is redefined. Children study under lamps, radios broadcast debates and music, and communities stay connected to a wider world that once felt impossibly distant. The psychological impact is immense. People no longer see themselves as forgotten. They see themselves as participants in modern Mozambique. Health is another battleground where electricity draws the line between life and death. Refrigerated vaccines, stored medicines, and powered clinics are not luxuries. They are lifelines. Rural pharmacies that once turned away patients for lack of safe storage now carry the medicines that prevent epidemics. In maternity wards, lights that stay on through the night mean safer births. It is easy for outsiders to dismiss these as technical gains, but for the families who see their children grow up healthy because of cold chain medicine, electricity is the most powerful form of healthcare reform. The ripple effect extends into transport and trade. With reliable power, local mechanics, welders, and small-scale manufacturers can operate equipment that was once out of reach. Roads become busier with traders moving goods that no longer spoil in the heat. These changes don't always make the headlines, but they are the invisible arteries of a new economy taking shape. Electricity, in this sense, is less about wires than about confidence. The confidence to invest in a small business, to plant crops knowing they can be preserved, to plan a future without constant fear of collapse. The dignity that comes with electricity cannot be overstated. For decades, the narrative about Africa has been one of scarcity. Scarcity of resources, scarcity of opportunity, scarcity of hope. Yet the arrival of electricity reveals a different truth. The continent has never lacked talent, ambition, or resilience. It has only been denied the tools to unleash them. When light arrives, people do not sit idle. They innovate. They expand, they create. This is the essence of sovereignty, not waiting for the outside world to dictate terms, but using energy as the fuel for self-determination. And yet, even as these stories inspire, they raise the next unavoidable question. If electricity transforms lives so powerfully at the community level, can Mozambique realistically extend this miracle to all of its 33 million citizens by 2030? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Mozambique has set itself an audacious goal. By 2030, every one of its 33 million citizens will have access to electricity. On paper, it sounds like a straightforward extension of the gains already made. After all, the country has more than doubled access in just 6 years, climbing from 31% in 2018 to 60% by 2024. But the closer you look, the clearer it becomes. This is not a routine development target. It is a race against geography, history, and time itself. The first obstacle is sheer scale. Mozambique stretches across 800,000 square kilometers, much of it rural, remote, and thinly populated. Connecting villages tucked deep inside the interior is not like wiring up dense urban blocks. Every kilometer of transmission line costs money. Every extension pole must cut through forests, fields, or floodplains. In places where roads themselves are broken or non-existent, building a reliable grid is a logistical puzzle as complex as it is expensive. That is why universal access cannot rely on the national grid alone. Enter the dual strategy. Centralized generation through mega projects like Mafanda and Kua on one side, and decentralized off-grid solutions on the other. The state-owned utility, Electricidade de Mozambique (EDM), has been the backbone of grid expansion, connecting more than 500,000 households in 2024 and aiming for 600,000 in 2025. Its engineers are pushing lines further into the countryside, but the task is Sisyphean. For communities too far away, the government is deploying solar mini-grids, home systems, and hybrid solutions. Today, about 10% of electricity access comes from these off-grid sources, a number set to rise sharply. In practice, this means the future of electrification in Mozambique is not one network, but many, overlapping and evolving according to need. But electrification is not just about stringing wires and installing panels. It is about building resilience into a system vulnerable to both climate and conflict. Mozambique knows this better than most. Cyclones batter the coastline almost yearly, ripping apart infrastructure and plunging towns into darkness. Insurgents in the north have already demonstrated how fragile energy projects can be, forcing international companies to suspend multi-billion-dollar gas ventures. Universal access, therefore, requires more than technical ambition. It requires political stability and adaptive planning. The question is not just whether Mozambique can build fast enough, but whether it can build in ways that survive storms, violence, and volatility. The clock ticking toward 2030 only raises the pressure. Every year without progress is another year of lost opportunities for children who study by candlelight, for clinics that cannot refrigerate medicine, for entrepreneurs whose dreams are capped by darkness. Yet Mozambique's government has made electrification a national identity project. Officials speak of lighting every home, not as an abstract target, but as a symbol of belonging. The idea that no Mozambican, however far from the capital, should feel left behind in the nation's rise. It is a vision that touches something deeper than economics. It is about dignity and unity in a country long divided by geography, class, and conflict. Still, the enormity of the task raises a sharper, more unsettling question. Can Mozambique's electrification drive, no matter how ambitious, truly stand on its own? Or must it be understood as part of a continental struggle? Because while Mozambique races toward its 2030 goal, it is not racing alone. Across Africa, other nations are damming rivers, installing panels, and stringing grids, all trying to break free from the same historic chains of energy poverty. To understand Mozambique's effort fully, we must place it within that broader story. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. If Mozambique's electrification drive is a national race, then Africa's energy awakening is a continental battle. From Cairo to Cape Town, from Addis Ababa to Kinshasa, the map is shifting as rivers long treated as scenery or colonial resource corridors are now being dammed, diverted, and transformed into instruments of sovereignty. And that is the stage at which Mozambique has just planted Mafanda and Kua. Look north to Ethiopia, where the Grand Renaissance Dam has redefined what one nation can demand from a river. Built on the Blue Nile, it is a $4 billion wager that Ethiopia can double its power supply and export electricity to neighbors. But more than power, it is leverage. Leverage against Egypt, which once assumed eternal dominance over the Nile. Ethiopia's defiance proves that control of water flows is control of politics, and that energy can redraw old hierarchies in a region. Look west to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the Inga 3 project, part of the world's most ambitious hydro plans, has been floated for decades. If fully realized, it could produce enough electricity not just for Congo, but for South Africa, Nigeria, and beyond. In a country where warlords once ruled and foreign companies pillaged minerals, Inga 3 represents something different. The possibility that Congo could dictate the terms of regional energy, no longer as a raw exporter of ore, but as a supplier of life itself, power. And now look south, to Mozambique, standing on the Zambezi. The Cahora Bassa Dam already looms large in regional memory. Built under Portuguese colonial rule, it supplied electricity not to rural Mozambicans, but to South Africa's apartheid regime. That historical insult still lingers, a reminder of how African rivers once powered the oppressor while leaving the oppressed in darkness. Mafanda Nkua is the reversal of that story. This time, the project is rooted in Mozambique's own ambition, with exports designed not to feed colonial industries, but to strengthen Africa's trade networks. This is why the project resonates so deeply beyond its borders. Africa still holds around 90% of its hydropower potential untapped. To outsiders, that looks like a market waiting to be exploited. To Africans, it looks like unfinished business. The rivers that once enriched empires can now be turned into engines of independence. Every dam is a declaration. We will no longer import light while exporting resources. We will no longer buy electricity at inflated prices while our rivers run untapped beneath our feet. Mozambique's dam matters not just because of its size, but because of its timing in this wider movement. Southern Africa faces a staggering deficit of nearly 10,000 megawatts. Industries stall, cities black out, and economies limp. Whoever steps in to supply power steps into a position of authority. By moving forward with Mafanda Nkua, Mozambique has chosen to be that authority. It has chosen to be the country others must now depend on, the one neighbors will call when their grids falter. That kind of leverage is not measured in kilowatts alone. It is measured in political weight. And yet, there is a reason why African hydropower stories always come with tension. Every mega project raises the question: who truly controls the profits, the risks, and the terms? When Ethiopia built its dam, it faced diplomatic warfare. When Congo talks about Inga 3, critics warn of exploitation by outside firms. And with Mozambique's dam, the same debate surfaces. Can Africa build rivers for Africans? Or will foreign companies still dictate the rules? Every great African project eventually collides with the same hard wall: money. Dams may be built with concrete and steel, but they are financed with debt, and debt can be as dangerous as any storm or insurgency. Mozambique knows this all too well. Its public liabilities already stand at nearly $17 billion, and billions more are consumed annually in debt repayments. So when the announcement of Mafanda Nkua rang out, celebration was quickly shadowed by a question: is this Africa's leap forward or another chain to global lenders? This is where the story demands clarity. The World Bank is not writing a blank check. Instead, it is providing risk insurance, environmental oversight funding, and political guarantees. The heavy lifting, the billions in real investment, comes from a consortium of global firms like Total Energies and Électricité de France. On the surface, this could be read as dependency: another African river, another round of foreign companies installing turbines. But look closer, and the dynamics shift. Mozambique is not passively accepting charity. It is negotiating with global giants on its own soil, making them stakeholders in its national strategy rather than masters of its destiny. That distinction matters. Critics, of course, argue otherwise. Energy analysts like Ivaristo Kumban have warned bluntly: the World Bank is not a godfather, it is not God. The guy is here on business and he is right. No institution enters Africa without expecting a return. But the fact that Mozambique has secured this deal on the back of its own priorities, not at the whim of Western aid agencies, not under the weight of donor conditionalities, marks a shift. It signals that Africa is learning to flip the script, to use the very structures once used against it as bargaining tools for its own vision. Still, the risks are real. A $6 billion project is not built in isolation. Transmission lines must stretch, environmental standards must hold, and repayment schedules must not suffocate the very economy the project is meant to energize. History offers cautionary tales. Mega projects across the continent have at times turned into white elephants, bleeding treasuries dry while delivering little to ordinary people. Mozambique cannot afford that outcome. For Mafanda Nkua to succeed, it must be the dam that lives up to its promise, not the one that feeds foreign shareholders while villages remain in darkness. But here lies the deeper truth. Africa's greatest risk is not building dams with debt. Its greatest risk is not building them at all. To remain dependent on imported fuel, to limp forward with chronic shortages, to let rivers run untapped while cities choke in blackout, That is the true recipe for perpetual dependency. By daring to gamble on Mafanda and Kua, Mozambique is at least seizing the initiative, choosing risk in pursuit of sovereignty rather than safety and stagnation. This is where Defiance enters the picture. The people of Mozambique have endured civil wars, natural disasters, and insurgencies, yet they remain unbroken. When new power poles rise in forgotten districts, when wires are strung into towns that have waited generations for light, it is not seen as another World Bank project. It is seen as Mozambique reclaiming its right to modernity. The barber who plans to buy new equipment, the farmer who dreams of refrigerated storage, the student who imagines a future no longer bound by candles, these are the real shareholders of the project. And they will measure its success not in repayment schedules, but in lives transformed. So yes, Mafanda and Kua comes with a cost. Yes, it carries the fingerprints of global institutions, but it also carries the unmistakable stamp of African ambition. Mozambique has not chosen the path of dependence. It has chosen the path of confrontation, confronting poverty, confronting underdevelopment, confronting the old order that said Africa should wait its turn. The price of power is steep, but the cost of remaining powerless is far higher. And that is why this project will be remembered not as another debt burden, but as a declaration of defiance, Africa betting on itself no matter the odds. If Africa doesn't build its own power, who will? Is debt really the enemy, or is dependence the real trap? Let us know in the comment section. When Mozambique lights up the Zambezi, will the world finally see Africa's strength, or still pretend it's weak? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.